Radio. You can catch up with all our shows by visiting our YouTube channel or by listening back at ttradio.org. Don't forget to like and subscribe to enjoy more live education conversation from TTR. We hope you enjoy this show.
Outstanding and world-class vision, world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Point of View. So this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your first order. And also a reminder that Teachers Talk Connect, so join the Teachers Talk radio team in Manchester on Saturday, 1st of March 2025 for Teachers Talk Connect, our biggest free event ever, and hear from main stage speakers including Lee Parkinson, Mr. P, Kate Jones, and Vic Goddard. So hi everyone.
Morning. Hello Yasmin.
Morning Yasmin.
Hello. Hi David. Hi Tarjinder. So where do you guys want to start today?
Right, okay, so the first question is going to be about Catherine Birbalsingh and the Education Secretary. I think it's really, this has been bubbling now for over a week, and I know that we could have talked about it last week, but essentially it comes down to this meeting that she had. So the background to this is that Michaela have done what they've done for 3 years in a row, 2 other years in a row, which has got the best Progress 8 scores in the country, you know, really have shown what is possible in a highly disadvantaged area, not just as a one-off, but year in, year out. There was then a question by an MP about whether the Education Secretary was going to congratulate Catherine in Parliament, which she didn't do. Although, to be fair, she didn't congratulate any of the other top schools either, but that's a kind of slightly unusual thing. And then she did bring Catherine Birbalsingh in to have a meeting with her, and there was sort of quite a lot of fallout. So from the perspective of Catherine Birbalsingh, there was no real respect there. Basic things didn't happen, like there wasn't water on the table, like, you know, like just things. It was like just the whole sort of setup didn't seem to be quite right. But then from the Education Secretary's point of view, you know, she did have this meeting. She felt like she was interrupted by Catherine Birbalsingh. But the thing that I find interesting is the leak from the DFE itself, which was that the Education Secretary didn't need any lectures. And that seems a really unusual way to go about having that, even if they didn't agree or see eye to eye. Very unusual way of conducting yourself as an Education Secretary, particularly when you've got, you know, a leader who's got just the best scores going in the country. So, yeah, just wanted to put it out there and see what people thought.
Can I go first?
Go ahead.
Is that okay with everybody? Yeah, I've gone to and fro with this. My immediate reaction was that it seemed a bit harsh from the head of Michaela, that the meeting obviously sounded like she'd gone in with an agenda, but I read a really good interview with her this week about her issues with the changes and the meeting and what happened. And obviously the article did have a response from the minister. And now I'm a bit torn. I think clearly the meeting didn't go how anybody would want it to. And I think we've all been in situations like that where we would like a rerun. And I think the situation is, she's clearly, I mean, like any of us, if we've built up something we're super proud of and we really believe in it and it works, and someone looks like they're going to force changes on us, you could see how all of us would be, you know, particularly if it was something like a school you actually created. The only thing I felt a bit harsh was when she accused the minister of being a Marxist. I was like, well, I think that might be pushing it a little bit. I don't think the minister's a Marxist. There's clearly issues and but with it. But yeah, I've sort of gone this week. I've been like, no, it was too harsh. Then I read her response, read the minister's response, and I've sort of fallen somewhere in between. Like I can see both perspectives on it, basically.
Okay. Shall I go next? I think we have to take background into consideration here. We know that Catherine Birbalsingh was a social mobility czar under the previous government. She famously made her name before she was head at Michaela for speaking at a Conservative Party conference where she was cheered. So I think it's fair to say that she's laid her political cards on the table in a very obvious way over the years. So it's hardly surprising that the present Secretary of State is not going to be especially disposed towards her. And I think the other thing is that Catherine Birbalsingh is in a very particular situation. And I think it's whatever you think about the rights and wrongs of her approach at Michaela, I think we have to bear in mind that it's a whole different level of thinking to extrapolate that to a national situation. So what might work in a very particular place when you've got one school operating as a free school, and let's be honest, with a significant amount of additional investment because free schools got that under the previous government, is completely different to what is reasonable to expect to work system wide. And I think that's where the clash comes in. And I think to be honest, Catherine Birbalsingh didn't do herself any favors by starting to get very emotional and throwing out terms like Marxist, which are clearly hyperbole, clearly emotive, and I think it probably suggests that her star is waning, and because it's waning, she wants to shout about it in order to get some attention, so she can at least rally her supporters to sort of fight back in a way.
Yeah, you know what, Carl? I feel like you took the words. Well, initially, I feel like I have nearly all of the same views as exactly what you were saying. Like when I first saw that, like my first thoughts did go back to that time when she was at the Conservative conference and she got that massive, round of applause. Like I just thought, it's a difference in views. And one thing I do want to say as well that I agree with you when it got emotive, and I didn't. I feel like in many ways it reminded me, and obviously this isn't everybody in there, but in many ways it reminded me of X and how, a lot of emotive language is used in arguments and how, outspoken she is on X. And in many ways I just saw it as the same thing. And, I feel like for a lot of people, if, obviously for me, Catherine Birbalsingh does have a lot of credibility because she does have the best PA in the country. So that is something I do think about. But, I do think if you're very outspoken on social media and you quite regularly get away with using that emotive language towards people who disagree with you, then I just, to me, I feel like I wasn't particularly surprised.
No, I mean, I think it's. Sorry, yeah, go on, Tarjinder.
No, I think it's interesting, isn't it? I think when it comes to her links to the Conservative Party, I think it's fair to say that at that point in time, a Labour government weren't going to listen to you. That literally, they weren't about to listen to what you had to say. And so I don't think that she could have got a different outlet. If I think you could have said that she could have gone to either party conference and she would have been listened to, then that's one thing. And there are things that are party political, and I think there are things that aren't, and hence the fact that you saw even within the last sort of Conservative government, when they did bring panels together, actually you can't really accuse them of having only had people who were right wing, people who were like dyed-in-the-wool Conservatives, who like card-carrying members. Actually, there was quite a lot of diversity of thought there, and people who I know voted Labour, I know were openly sort of left wing, but they were being allowed to sort of be part of the consultations, that kind of thing. Whereas I think Bridget Phillipson has gone the other way and just gone, right, that's it. I'm not going to listen to anybody who doesn't come from my political background. But that is a choice, because you can make education that much of a political background, a political battlefield if you want to. But I think it's also fair to say that Catherine isn't Even though, you know, she would have got certain positions, she also wasn't necessarily, I genuinely don't know, like, for all I know, that she isn't a card-carrying Conservative member at all, you know. I think she's always said that she's a floating voter, and that's what she is. Just to kind of stick up for her a little bit here, though, I think the reluctance to look at what has gone right at Michaela would be frustrating for anybody who runs a school like that, particularly if you're going to push through a schools bill. And this is what concerns me about that schools bill, is there's a safeguarding element of it, and there's a schools bill part of it, which is to do with the curriculum. And I think where Catherine makes the most valid point of view is, why are you pushing forward a bill that says that we will, if it passes, says schools must follow a certain curriculum, right? That's going to be centrally directed. And yet your curriculum assessment review isn't even finished. Like, there's something doesn't quite ring right there. And I also do feel, and this has got nothing to do with Catherine, I think there's something not right about the way that it's been gone about, because it means that every time somebody's criticised any aspect of the schools bill, and you've seen that happen in Parliament as well, it's like, oh, but you don't care about safeguarding. There seems to be something just not right about that argument. Those two bills that should not have been one bill. They should have been two separate bills. And it seems to me there's some sort of incompetence there by putting it into one bill, because actually that safeguarding part could have gone through, and then you could have had more of a debate, because where the people who are now against that schools bill have got like, from a school's perspective, have got a real say. It's like, well, what are you doing? And it doesn't make her, like the education secretary, seem particularly competent when she can't answer questions about the schools bill side of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. In the interview I read, you know, Catherine's whole, that was the bit that resonated with me the most. I think, you know, as teachers or as people in education, one of the things we hate is like that uncertainty. So the idea that they're, you know, asking people to sign up to a national curriculum, they can't, you know, name what that's going to be. I thought that was the bit that, you know, really sort of, I thought, yes, that bit rings absolutely true. Just on what you were saying, Carl, to be fair, she did say in the interview, she doesn't think Michaela works for everybody. She didn't want to oppose. It was the freedom to do what she wants to do. She was scared of being taken away. So, you know, she wasn't saying, oh, they should come and see Michaela for that. It really resonated in the sense that, like, what works for Michaela is because she has this freedom. What she's scared of is the freedom being taken away, not wanting to oppose it across. I mean, that's what she said in the interview anyway. And my third point was the other thing that, I mean, within that, 70% of head teachers and trust head have come back saying, actually, they don't think the bill will do that much because they mostly teach the national curriculum anyway and employ teachers who were qualified teachers. So that raises another question. If 70% of people say it won't change anything, you know, you could go to another debate is, well, what's the point of the bill? The biggest thing head teachers worry about is the change to Ofsted, not this. Obviously, Catherine's different. And my last thing is, the big thing she rallied against was who they've chosen to do the review, and I've forgotten her name, but the head of the EEF.
Becky Francis, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I thought that was slightly unfair. She was talking about something Becky Francis wrote in 2006 and saying, you know, she can't be in charge of this. And Becky Francis sort of came back and said, well, I'm just a facilitator. We can't make a judgment yet, can we? And I thought that was a bit unfair to go, Catherine said it was the worst, the most horrible thing or something she'd ever read in education. I don't know if you've read that forward in 2006 she's referring to. And I thought, that's a long time ago. You know, the proof will be in the pudding. We've got to wait. I thought there was things she said I would like totally resonate, totally agree with what you're saying, Tarjinder. And there were other things I was like, oh, that's slightly unfair. We don't know. We've got to wait and see. I would, you know, I like the EF. We'll see how it goes. You know, so that's why I'm like, oh, I like this, but I don't like that. You know, like a long interview process. You can raise lots of different things. Oh, sorry, just to take up one more thing. I do think, given how strict Michaela is in rhetoric and communication and how strict they are with their students about how even at lunchtime they have to have topics to talk on, there was a slight irony, I thought, in her getting so emotional. I was thinking, oh, your students would be taught to do exactly, or they are taught to do the opposite. So I thought there was a slight irony there as well.
If I can add, I was just going to say that I think that there is a wider context to all of this, which is that the free school movement was most definitely a Michael Gove initiative, and Michaela is the flag bearer of free schools.
Absolutely.
And I think the day and age of free schools and that particular political approach has, I think it's been, and now it's clear that it's on its way out. I mean, that will move us on probably to the wider debate about the academy system, or at least where's multi-academy trusts. But I think the whole thing is coloured by the fact that Catherine Berbel-Singh will be aware that ultimately this government does not really believe in the free school movement, does not think that it's the answer to education and raising standards in this country, and therefore the very essence of what she has benefited from and promoted is at fundamental odds with what the government wants to do. And I think you can't, all these other things I think are probably to a degree a proxy for the fundamental position that each of them occupies.
Yeah.
But it also seems to me, again, that there's a kind of amnesia going on here, which is that while you may not have agreed with the free schools, but again, if you look at the record of the free schools, there were people who were conservative and people who weren't conservative. Your Peter Hymans of the world were always like very closely linked to the Labour Party, and yet he was still allowed to have that free school. So you've got to say, in terms of the actual distribution of free schools, it was not in itself political. People were given the opportunities if they could come forward with good ideas and innovations. And where you've got to give due to what, say, Gove or Gill did, where they weren't party political, where they were willing to just do the right thing because it would be the right thing by the children, so we could really see what was going on, so people could make these innovations and see what worked and what didn't, which is what we didn't have. Then you've got to give them kudos for that. But the other thing that I feel quite strong about is I've worked for both multi-academy trusts and for local authority schools. And yeah, probably the type of schools that I worked for meant that I worked for the kind of local authorities that weren't particularly great, right? You don't end up in sort of dysfunctional schools in disadvantaged areas because the local authorities did a great job. But I think their capacity to improve things has lessened, and yet somehow they're going back to that. And it's almost like this idea that, well, no, local authorities never did anything wrong. The bad thing is this slightly tainting all the free schools and the multi-academy trust as being slightly capitalist. And I think that's where the Marxist comment comes from, even if you don't agree with it. But there's a kind of tainting of that, which doesn't seem quite right. But it also doesn't seem to me quite right that local authority should automatically have a greater say in the running of schools, or that all of a sudden we're going to stop multi-academy trusts. There's no incentive now for any of the multi-academy trusts to take on the school, to support them in any way. So all of this capacity that's being built within that part of the system, that's not to say there's nothing in the local authorities, there are, but what you're doing is you're taking away part of the capacity to support other schools, and you've got nothing to put in there. So what are they actually doing? It's all very well saying we can cull certain things. Maybe you can, but actually what you're pulling from the system, does she genuinely understand what she's doing there? And I'm not 100% sure that Bridget Phillipson does have the knowledge. I think she's got like a one-sided opinion of these things. And to that extent, someone like Catherine saying, can you come and actually look at any of us, like not just Michaela, but any of these schools and see what they actually do, these top performing schools, or multi-academy trusts or whatever. I can see why she's saying that, because would we genuinely be better off without Michaela, without say your Harrises, your Arcs, your whatever it is, like whichever pick them out. I'm not going to name my own because I don't think that's fair, but equally I'd say I've seen such good stuff happen. And I never saw the equivalent of that coming from local authorities. And also I didn't see the empowering of sort of leaders and head teachers and ordinary teachers in the same way either, because that capacity wasn't quite there within local authorities. Do you see what I mean? There's been all this innovation, and I don't think she really genuinely understands what that innovation is. And that is part of the issue.
Sorry, Tarjinder, just very quickly. The only thing I disagree is when you said a one-sided view. I sort of see the problem is I still have not seen a good justification for these changes. I don't think there is a view. Like, there's changes seem to be going. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I still haven't seen Phillipson really say, like, this is the problem. This is what it's going to solve. This is why we're doing it. I don't quite understand what the view is. So I don't disagree with each other on this. Like, when you say one, I'm like, what is the problem that's meant to be fixed? How does this work? I think that's the biggest problem with the bill. I think, it could work, but what's being fixed?
I think, David, that's probably because Labour and Bridget Phillipson are still learning their craft when it comes to how to communicate what their true goals are. Because I think there are some very clear reasons and thinking. I mean, it's not for me to speak on their behalf, but I think that it seems to me pretty clear that they think that a model which is a quasi business model based on market-based solutions, which is what multi-academy trusts are inspired by, the idea that is absolutely the wrong approach to public service, and they are gradually wanting to unravel the role of the market and the role of business based solutions and that kind of thinking to the public sector. They want to unravel that, but you can't unravel that easily and quickly because it's been so closely embedded or strongly embedded in the system now for certainly the last 15 years. And I think it's been well illustrated by the appearance of the RISE teams, because the RISE teams are an alternative, if you like, form of school improvement, moving to a model that was historically much more common, whereby school improvement came through bodies that were independent of schools and were locally arranged so that they would stick around, so that they would stay with the same schools and work with the same schools over a period of time. And that model is where they're moving, and that's what they want to do. But I think that they probably came into power a little bit before they expected to, and I think they've had to develop their message on the hoof a bit. And I think to an extent, Bridget Phillipson has had to learn through the brutal experience of finding out who holds the power in the media, or leastways how the media works, and have to alter the way that the message is communicated. So I think there's a model in terms of the messaging. I think the actual intent is very clear to me. I think there is a very definite shift, and I do think that the idea that multi-academy trusts and free schools are the answer is now one that is falling out of favor. And I think if you take 10 years from now, if Labour get another term, I think you will see that they will have a very, very diminished role in the way that the education system works in this country.
Well, that's for the good or the worse. It's got to be a separate thing, hasn't it? But I also think there's an element of just when Bridget Phillipson came out with that stuff about I don't need lectures, I've got my lived experience. It did make me laugh. I thought, do you know what? That's you on your dinner party circuit, right? Outside your Westminster bubble, that kind of talk is not going to go down very well. You know, like seriously, your lived experience as a child is not the same thing as what a teacher and a leader has to do on a day-to-day basis. You can't throw that back at anybody within the system. It's just not going to... It's just not a comment that's going to win you any favors from any quarter. You know what I mean? It's like, come on, you are the education secretary. If you weren't happy about the tone of if what Catherine said, fine, there are ways of expressing it, but that is not something that's going to hold water outside a certain bubble that you live in. And for you to act like you live in a bubble to people who are on the front, you know, like literally who are holding the front line all the time is not going to serve you.
No, I just felt that there was a few things said after the meeting that just seemed almost immature on both sides. Like I said, they sort of and now that you could sort of, things are maybe calming down a bit, you can look at it both ways. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. But I would also say, asking the minister, are you only doing this so you can take on Keir Starmer as leader, which she did say is all. There was a few things I thought from both sides. That's just.
But I really struggle with that. I feel like for me, I really struggle with that because, you know, on the one hand, Catherine Birbalsingh does run the best school in the country. And then on the other hand, you know, when I see her kind of public persona, I do sometimes find it really hard to reconcile with this. You know, I would never I know a lot of people criticize loads of different things about Michaela, but, you know, credit where credit's due. I think there is a lot, you know, I'm even from, you know, an adjacent neighborhood to where Michaela is. And, you know, I know so many communities from, you know, what Catherine Rebelsing would refer to as, you know, disadvantaged, who really appreciate what she's done for, you know, the children in the local area. So, you know, I think I would never take that, you know, credit away from her. And also, I do think there is a lot of criticism as well of Michaela that's quite valid. And I guess it just depends, you know, what is most important to people in a school. But just for me there, I just really struggled to reconcile, because sometimes when I see what I describe as, you know, outbursts or, you know, kind of ad hominem on in her public persona, I do sometimes think, well, would that be acceptable at school? You know, do her children, do the school community see this? Like, I do just wonder. I find it quite odd. And, you know, that is something that, you know, does replay in my mind. But I'm just going to read the ad again and just remind everyone that this show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational. Also, we've spent 25 minutes on this topic now. Should we move on to our next one?
Yeah, sounds good. I just wanted to say finally, I totally agree with what you just said. Yeah, I feel exactly the same way.
What, Tarjinder, are you aware of what the next topic is?
David.
Oh, yes. Oh, sorry. We want to go with that one. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So, article I read this week. I must put my cards on the table. The school, one of the schools named in the article is the school my daughter goes to. So I have a vested interest in this. But simply, it was an article about the VAT on private schools is allegedly leading to more middle-class, like overcrowding in schools, a waiting list people can't get into, house prices, and like, you know, where I live, in the catchment area going up. So it's pricing out people anyway, people playing the system, enrolling their kids, like basically saying their kids live with the grandparents. And the article is saying, look, all we're going to see with this VAT, it might help state schools to a point, but it's also going to see more sort of, I guess, of those people that might have gone to private schools coming into this good state schools, moving to areas, outpricing people anyway, putting pressure on schools and playing the system, and that you still get inequality. And it reminded me, I'm not sure if you've come across the academic Nick Dennis, who I really, really like. Years ago, I'll never forget, at a conference, he said you could abolish private schools completely. You never get equality, because all that will happen is the people who know how to game the system will do exactly what this article was saying, and house prices go up, and private schools sort of, you know, might be out, but you will still have embedded equality, because those people who know how to play the game and have the money to move their kids to certain areas will simply do it. And that's what the article was saying. So I was just interested in it, particularly being in an area that they named. And so I thought, I was just interested in what other people thought.
Can I start on this one, David?
Yeah,
I must declare, first of all, a vested interest, because I was an originator. I wrote a chapter in a book called Education Redesign back in 2018, where I advocated precisely this policy, and then forwarded it to the Labour Party consultation on education at the time. So it would be disingenuous of me not to make that clear from the start, and to say that first of all, there was a hysterical reaction, which I would argue is typical of people who are used to having power and then having that power challenged. There was a hysterical reaction in certain sections of the media about the potential leading up to the enactment of this policy for it to lead to, you know, all manner of dreadful things. And my own school, I lead a school that's in an area where it's surrounded by major public schools. And the idea that you know, we'd all be flooded with applications from the private sector, and that the state sector would be undermined, it wouldn't be able to cope, and so on and so forth. And of course, there's absolutely no evidence of that at all. And there was never any chance of that happening. And there's no evidence of that at all. There is the evidence is anecdotal. So what's happened is that, you know, some media outlets who clearly don't like the policy and never did, will select examples, and they'll give anecdotes of a person X or person Y who, you know, but there's no actual evidence at all. There's no proper evidence base at all that state schools are being flooded with applications from private schools, children from private schools, and more than that, there was never likely to be. So I think we need to recognise that fact. And I mean to challenge the academic David that you were citing. I think, while I get what he's saying, inequality is driven by other things than schools. Schools are to a large extent the product of inequality rather than I mean, they can generate it, but generally I think they're the product of it. But I think that to say, well, because it won't fundamentally change everything, we shouldn't do anything about it. I think that's I don't think that's really right. I think you've got to do something about things. I think even if it won't solve everything, you've got to make a start. And I welcome the move. I think that it was exactly the right thing, and I think that the majority of the public think that. And I therefore think that while you can argue about the details of a policy like this all the time, it's an important step forward.
Yeah, I'll just make one more comment on that. Just to be fair on Nick, it was before the VAT, and his argument was, so he's an academic and teacher of Afro-Caribbean background, and his argument was, like, I live in an area that's on the train. The amount of people we meet in this area, it's a very good state school. And we're like, oh, why did you move to this area? Oh, because we lived in London, we had kids, couldn't afford it. Look down the train line. Where's the best school? One of the best state schools in the country. It was cheaper to move than go to a private school. Okay, and the amount of people you meet. Now, this is way before the VAT. And his argument was that people in underprivileged areas in London who, you're right, suffer all sorts of socioeconomic deprivation, don't have the ability to just up sticks and move to a nice area that's an hour on the train from London. And so his argument was, I think you sort of he would agree with you and say there's more fundamental things. And I guess more his argument was you could wipe out private schools and it wouldn't solve anything because people who are more privileged will know how to play the system, and those who can't just leave their area because they see a better school would. So that was more his argument. I think
from my perspective, having looked, I don't have a dog in this fight in the sense that I never went to a private school. I don't know anybody who does. I don't know, actually, I don't think I even know anybody who works in a private school at this point. Well, possibly one person, but I mean, really, to me, in some ways, if the whole VAT issue is neither here nor there up to a point, because whether it's right or wrong, I think there's various arguments both pro and against. However, what concerns me, and again, this is going back to the government and the government's attitude, there seems to be a kind of vindictiveness. There's just this air of vindictiveness about certain things. I don't think that this should have been something that happened in January. I'm sorry, I just don't think you should have done it in January. There was no need for that, right? Like, at the end of the day, those 5-year-olds are still 5-year-olds. Those 12-year-olds are still 12-year-olds, okay? If the parents had to make a decision to move them, you should have given them to the end of the year. And that is an act you could have done. It was not necessary to do it at this point in time. And if I'm saying that to you, because I'm having to look at 5-year-olds going, that's just not the right thing to do. It isn't. It just doesn't give you the air of credibility that you want. Secondly, I don't think it's going to make a massive difference. I don't think it will be the death knell of private schools. They're still going to exist. And like I've joked before, and I'll joke again, part of the reason why, Labour politicians don't really want to get cull all the private schools is because they occasionally like to send their own children to them, right? And there is a truth to that. I've seen it enough times in my lifetime. So let's not pretend that they're not willing to undergo this hypocrisy. They will. What I would like to think is, what is the fairest thing to do in this situation? Do people actually want to get rid of all private schools? And what do you think is going to happen? Because what's happening right now is where schools have got less money. So this is coming from people who actually work in private schools, where they've got less money now. Literally what's happening is that the number of scholarships is going down. It's going to become even more elitist than it was before. So if that was the end outcome you wanted, this is how it's going to happen. There's literally no incentive for them to do any outreach work. Not really, not anymore. So even those links are gone. So you can kind of see how I'm picturing the system. Because I'm picturing the system where you're withdrawing support from private schools where they did do it. And to be fair, there are private schools that have done outreach work that I know of and that my own classes have benefited from. So I'm not going to say that that's not happened when it has. There has been support given to you via other sources like the Multi-Academy Trust, all those kind of things. All that's going. So what is this government actually doing, like, to improve education? Because it seems to me you're making it more elitist via these actions. You're making it less and less worthy for anybody to support each other. And like you say, David, that whole situation with middle class people gaming the situation, which they do. And you know, like, again, I've got to sort of say personally, I don't have kids, so it's fine. But if I did, would I not consider doing the same thing? Probably. I probably would. I could quite easily maintain a facade of, oh yes, we all need to be equal, we all need to do that. And yet when it comes to your own children, your own family, your own friends' children, is anybody really criticizing them for moving to an area when that's happening? They're not. Okay, so what we've got to say is, what do we genuinely want? If we want to level up, if we want to improve things, then it can't just be through this kind of gaming around the system and taking something away from there and trying to put that. What do we actually need to do? What are the actual problems?
Yeah, I mean, just to comment on that, I still don't know enough about it. And Carl is right. All that article is anecdotal. They interview one parent after another. So I'm not, again, not really like nailing my colours to the wall here, because I don't have enough information to nail it down. I think Carl's right. All those articles, but there could be, and I've you know, read lots of stuff either way. But you're right, Carl, in the sense that those newspaper articles are, you know, very much like, here's a story about one person. So, well, can we extrapolate that? But I just saw that there was a comment about increased private tuition going up because of the VAT. I'm not sure, Yasmin, do you have any comments on that at all?
No, so I just wanted to quickly just go back to one of the things Tarjinder said. Like, I feel like it's a little bit like sensational, but I was gonna say, I feel like a lot of families will game the schooling system wherever they are. And I don't feel like this government have done anything to add to that. You know, even as a teacher myself in East London, I feel like I see that. I feel like, you know, there was a time I was even looking for somewhere to live, and you could even see estate agents listing, you know, schools' Ofsted ratings in their, you know, adverts for housing. And, you know, so like, I feel like the gaming would happen regardless, in all honesty. So, you know, I just wanted to make that comment. And as with regards to private tuition, I'm not sure about how it is linked to this VAT. However, I will say that, especially in London, I think a lot of communities where their parents haven't necessarily gone to school in England themselves or gone through the schooling system do sometimes seek private tuition because of the fact that they're trying to maximize the chances for their students. Now, I know there's completely different levels. Like, I know, you know, I know how different parents get private tuition is very different. Like, you know, I've seen that as a teacher. There are some, you know, centres like where I live in East London who offer, you know, tuition to groups of 10, for example, for like a reduced price, as opposed to like one-to-one. You know, I've taught children who have £50 an hour tutors or more. And then I've taught children who, you know, whose parents pay £5 an hour. So, you know, for me, I just feel like tuition has very different, like, parents have very different motivations. They have very different motivations, you know, and in all honesty, I've even seen, as someone who's taught in a state school, I have seen children honestly recruit £50 an hour tutors close to exam seasons to, you know, try and maximize their chances, even just for mock exams, and then get them again towards the end of the year, and then just do loads of work in between. So, you know, again, I just feel like I wouldn't know how it's linked to, you know, the VAT on these schools. I agree with Tarjinder that doing it in January, I don't necessarily agree with. I think, you know, whichever school you go to, families do deserve, you know, a heads up, you know, so they can make choices in September, for example, for a whole academic year. I definitely agree with that. But I also completely agree with Carl. I just think it's way too anecdotal. And I just think a lot of this gaming and a lot of the things that would happen anyway happened before this and would continue to happen after.
Yeah, I agree. Just on, sorry, I was just going to ask Carl a quick question. Well, now I'm just trying to remember what you're saying. Oh, yeah, the January bit. My understanding is, and you guys could completely it was one of Labour. It is one of Labour's most popular policies. When they do surveys on it, despite what the right-wing newspapers say, it's overwhelmingly popular. So my feeling about the January one is they got this popular policy. Let's get it through. It's what people want. That's the reason for January. That's my understanding.
Well, there's two things, I think, David. I think you're absolutely right, and I think it was, very obvious a year out from the election that Labour were going to win. I think almost nobody would have said that they weren't, and this was a policy that they were absolutely clear and upfront about from a long time ago. So, number one, I think to say it was something of a surprise would be a little bit kind of well, really.
I thought it was. I thought it was. I don't know enough about it.
Well, I mean, obviously, I can't speak on an individual level, but I mean, I think if you're a parent of a private school child, you may have, been aware of this. And I think the other thing is money. It brings in, and that the Treasury need money. Now, this is expected to bringing, something in the region of 1.6 billion pounds a year, according to the the Institute of Fiscal Studies, and that is a lot of money. And the government, the Treasury need that money, and education and state education needs that money. And this is, in that sense, free money for state education. This is money that state education would not have had were it not for this, and it desperately needs it. Now, it needs a lot more. You're absolutely right. This on its own is not going to change everything. It's not going to, inequality is most certainly not going to be reduced just on the back of this one policy. But that money is much needed. And over the next few years, if you add up how much money that will raise over 5 years, that is a very significant additional investment. I don't think we can just dismiss that. So I think that they wanted to get on with it. They figured that parents knew in private schools, and the schools themselves knew full well it was coming, it was going to happen. Therefore, it was only right and proper that they got on with putting the policy in place.
They've priced it in. Friends of ours who are in private schools, you could argue whether this is good or bad, but have sort of said, if you pay up front, like they basically gave some private schools around us a deal. So if you pay now for the January one and pay your extra for 2 years, you get 10% off as opposed. So I can't exactly tell you exactly how it works, but basically the private schools had already priced it in and made some sort of like, if you pay ahead now, you get a bit off in the future. So Sorry, Tarjinder, what were you going to say before?
No, I just wanted to say, I just don't see in the end, yes, it's going to generate some money, but the fact of the matter is that the issues that you're facing in terms of teacher recruitment and retention, so it's all very well having the money for it, except you don't have people who want to actually join the profession. That's your issue. And how are you going to make it any better or any more attractive? Because if anything, probably with the increase in VAT and all the rest of it and fees, private schools potentially would still be attracting the same people they've always attracted, because they'll still do it on the basis of what they will. They have to do even less compared to what they did, because I said if there's no outreach work, well, actually that's one job less you've got to do and you still get paid the same amount. I don't see what value it will really hold, because the genuine problems in our schools don't seem to be addressed by what's being delivered to us at the moment. Because if you won't look into things like behaviour, if you think curriculum is neither here nor there, and if you think every curriculum is the same, well, then that's just a joke, because there was a difference. And I think very few people that I know would want to go back and teach a skills-based curriculum now. Very few people would want to go back and not teach phonics. Very few people. In some ways, there's very little scope for what the government can do with that, because to move forward, they actually do need to listen to the system and the people in it, regardless of how they feel about multi-academy trusts or free schools. They're just going to have to actually listen up to what's been working and what's not, because otherwise you're just going to create more of a problem here. So yes, you have this money for teachers. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, right? Like I said, I'm pretty agnostic about the whole thing, because I just don't have a dog in the fight when it comes to private schools. But what are they actually hoping to achieve, and will it happen? Because I don't see how we're going to recruit more people into those inner city schools or those areas of disadvantage if the basic fundamental reasons why people don't join in the first place aren't being addressed. You know, I was speaking to, I was giving you a talk last week in Birmingham, and these two young women who were absolutely fantastic, you know, you think, you know, came out of their own time, gave up like, you know, an hour or two of their own time to sit in a cafe and listen to a couple of people talking about education reforms, right? They're the exact kind of people that you would want to actually be within teaching, you know, like, clearly of their own volition. I get that their attitude to me was just like, I'd love to, but I don't want to be yelled at. I don't want to have to deal with some of the problems. And what we're forgetting is that there's too many people who've left education over the last 20, 25, 30 years who are out there. And one of the reasons why people don't want to join us is because of all of their stories. So like I say, you can extract all this money, but what for?
Mm. Can I just come in there? I think that one of the things, Tarjinder, that makes people, if we're being entirely honest, want their child to attend a private school is because they don't want their child to be learning alongside children that they feel are challenging and more likely to hold them back, and perhaps, shall we say, of the wrong type. I mean, I know that's not the way that people would put it, but that's the way that in reality people think about it, I think. And therefore, I do think that the reality is if you get more children in the state schools, in the state sector, you get a more representative, a better representation of the real community in your area. And what you end up doing then is rising, a rising tide raises all ships. So what you get if you don't have children from different backgrounds and different perspectives in the same school, if you don't get that, then you get a ghettoization effect. So what you get are areas and schools that become stuck because they only will admit children from one background with, multiple issues. And you don't get those children who, shall we say, are more advantaged and are therefore, to a degree, a counterweight and an element that. So what we need in society is less people, in ghettos where they are living in a bubble, where they're their own children and their own interactions in their lives are with people entirely from the same background as themselves, and more people who are, mixing and therefore hopefully empathizing with people from different backgrounds. And I think the aim is to make state, apart from raising money, it's to make state schools more representative of society, because that's the fairer thing to do, and therefore to help those state schools because you'll never raise standards in state schools if you cream off all the most advantaged kids.
Sorry,
just to
come in. They don't want to go to is not going to that either. I genuinely think what you might find is the unintended consequence of this kind of social engineering is going to be an increase in the number of children who go to low cost private schools. I think you're going to find a massive increase in that, and probably some homeschooling, but actually low cost private schooling will be the way that some people will go. And I genuinely think this needs to be thought through a lot more, because in the end, if you're a parent and you don't want to send your child to that school, you're not going to do it. You're going to find a way around. And if you're more middle class in the beginning, you've got more options.
Sorry, I'm going to be anecdotal as well, Carl. So this is terrible evidence, but the people I know who have felt that they don't have a choice, it's not about the people. It's actually like SEN needs. So they felt that the local state school, the children had numerous sort of autistic needs. They felt the state school did not in any way serve them. This is, sort of an area of London. And they felt, now we can argue against that, but they felt they had to send their child to the private school because smaller class sizes. So it wasn't about, in that sense, it confused a bit, because it's not about elitism or the right type of kids. They felt very strongly that the state schools could not service the actual, the needs of their children at that level. But again, that's one family. They're, people I know. I totally agree with what you say about the challenging part. And just to sort of end my thought, and I think you said, Tarjinder, about the politics of like envy, and I fall into that. When I heard about private schools saying, I read an article and they were like, we might have to cut this subject, or we might have to cut this subject, I was like, join the real world. We've been having to do this, from when I started for the last 16 years where I work. Right. And then I did think, though, Tarjinder, I was like, yeah, maybe I'm sort of being like envious, like that's my personal feeling about, oh, well, hey, that's what we've had, the amount of subjects we've had to cut. And that's probably not fair. But so you can get very personal about these things, given where you work and what you've seen and how sympathetic you could be to an argument like that. And so that's my sort of final comment on my thoughts on this one.
No, but I think the politics of envy is a politicized phrase that's used on the right to counter anything that tries to establish fairness. Because if you take away a degree of privilege or access to privilege, then people will say, that's only because you're jealous. But the argument that counters that is, yes, but the reason why the system is loaded in the first place is what's wrong. So I don't blame David, an individual actor, an individual parent. I don't blame any parent for making a decision which is in the best interests of their child, any more than I'd blame somebody for, if they have the money and the opportunity, going to a private hospital to get treatment for a condition they've got. I think there's a difference between what's rational for an individual, given the system that they face, and what the right system is. And what it should be is rational for an individual to be able to send their child to the public service, because that public service is the service that will offer a really good standard. And the moment you introduce choice and you give, people will always ghettoize. So you've got to establish a bottom line and say, this is what everybody does. And then you work together as a community to raise the standard of that service. And hopefully what will happen is more, shall I say, middle-class parents will care about what happens in state education because they've got a stake in it. And this particular government is the first government in post-war history where the majority of the cabinet are from they were state educated. And I think that tells us an awful lot.
It's interesting.
I think if we're really
sold on this idea, by the way, Carl, because the problem is I've seen too much hypocrisy on this, too much over too many in terms of my time as a teacher. If what you want if that's what you want, I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing, but what I am saying is what you can't have, which is what has always existed, is left-wing middle-class people saying for thee, not for me. Right, that is what has happened on a scale over and over again. So some of it is going, oh, parents want choice, parents want this. Yeah, but so do those parents as well when push comes to shove. So if we're going to do this, it's got to be done properly and collectively. What you can't have is lots and lots of get out clauses for people basically the same as yourself, Carl, because as soon as that starts happening and those reports come out, you're going to ruin any opportunity that this happens. So even within the cabinet, they can't start sending their kids to more exclusive places. Do you see what I mean? You can't do this over and over again.
I mean, I think choice is a bit of a misnomer. Sorry, Yasmin. I think, Yasmin, you wanted to...
Sorry. Oh, no, that's okay. I wasn't. You can finish your comment. Oh, sorry, were you going to say any more, Carl?
No, I was just going to say, I think choice is a bit of a misnomer. It comes back to this market-based language that really emerged in the 80s, a sort of neoliberal, if only everybody has choice, we'll all be fine. The market will not solve problems that public services face. Public services need to be community services for everyone, not a take it or leave it model, because take it or leave it is driven by a very different world. And I think that's partly why we have the inequality and the unhappiness that we have in our society, because we've all been kind of almost, force-fed this language of, choice and buying things. And actually, education should be a service. It's a right for every young person, a human right. And I think what we need to concentrate on is making sure that all young people get the best possible education, not creating a situation where people are pitched against one another and it's all about who competes the best and all that sort of thing.
I mean, sorry, Yasmin. I mean, I totally agree with. I think, not to put words in your mouth, Tarjinder, but you're also saying, like, the proof will be in the pudding, what they spend the money on. Like with my anecdotal, like those friends of ours, if the money was spent well and they felt that now the state school was able to accommodate their students, that would be my, like, if, at the end of the day, if the money is taken to give them that choice, because they don't feel they've got a choice, and we can argue if that's true or not, then we'd say, oh, it's work. So it's so hard to sort of judge. But yeah, sorry, Yasmin, what were you going to say?
No, honestly, I'm just pretty much a facilitator today. So I've had very little to say throughout this. I was literally just going to wrap up and say final comments, let's end, but you guys have done them anyway. So thank you guys so much for coming today.
My pleasure.
No, I thoroughly enjoyed it. This is my first time on, and absolutely brilliant to hear from Carl, Tarjinder, and yourself, Yasmin. I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, a fantastic way to spend a Sunday morning.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Outstanding, a world-class vision, a world-class this.
I'm a real leadership geek, honestly. I've spent my whole career reading books and chatting to people.
I just find the whole thing and the announcement, the way it's been announced, bizarre.
If you could move away from a model where teachers are so intensely focused